In April 1945, the Second World War had not necessarily developed in favor of Germany, and especially the Kriegsmarine's large surface vessels, with only several still operational, one of which was the heavy cruiser Admiral Scheer. In the previous months, she had been employed in naval bombardment of advancing Soviet armies and helping in the evacuation of civilians. But on April 9th, 1945, in Kiel, she was bombed multiple times, and with further hits and near misses, she achieved a list of 28 degrees. Her remaining crew were ordered to abandon the ship, but due to electrical failures, the order did not reach all of the crew, causing salvage workers from the light cruiser Emden to cut into the hull in several places, and rescue teams scoured the upturned hull for 42 hours in search of survivors. Having discharged her fuel and ammunition, the Admiral Scheer capsized over a period of about 12 to 17 minutes in about 50 feet of water. The primary cause being a large gash on the starboard side caused by all the near misses. 15 men were left in the capsized ship. The ship was found in that capsized state by the advancing Allies when they took Kiel. In July 1945, work began to break up the ship under the supervision of British authorities, taking the valuable metals, gun houses, and turrets, leaving the bare torso of the ship where she lay. When work commenced in the new naval arsenal, the remains of the heavy cruiser were covered over with rubble to become the foundation of a new parking lot. As 1945 dawned and a major Soviet offensive developed from the Braunau bridgehead in mid-January, vastly superior forces advanced on the German homeland itself, and the few available elements of the German surface fleet became involved in the upcoming battles between German and Soviet forces, as floating artillery batteries against Soviet assembly points and advancing columns of troops. Admiral Scheer spent most of January in Pillau, engaging those aforementioned duties off the Zamland coast, in company with the few remaining torpedo boats. At 11 p.m. on the 18th of January at Pillau, Admiral Scheer made fast astern of the night fighting director ship Togo while she was brought around to give a full broadside to bear shoreward. Before the dawn on the 19th, Admiral Scheer unleashed her 6 28cm guns and the portside 15cm battery in support of the German land offensive to reopen the Königsberg-Pillau land corridor for the escape of refugees. By the first light, the heavy cruiser retired offshore and returned at the same time the following day to bombard Soviet positions for 2 hours from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., the objective of their action being achieved. Like other warships of the Kriegsmarine, she was enlisted in the care of refugees, protecting the overfilled hospital ships and trains, and rendering assistance to wounded boarding those other means of transportation. The desperation of the situation in East Prussia at the time called for almost everything that could float to be pressed into service to carry refugees, with small parties from the ships going ashore to secure incomplete torpedo boat hulls to be towed westward. Off Elbing on February 6th, Admiral Scheer bombarded Russian lines at a range of 35 kilometers, expending over 1,000 rounds of her 28cm and 15cm guns. As a result of this and similar operations off Pillau, her guns were in urgent need of reboring. The only workshop that had the machinery to rebore her guns was in Kiel, so the cruiser sailed for the battered German city, in the process taking on refugees and wounded and dropping them off at Gotenhofen or today Gdynia. On March 9th, the captain of the Admiral Scheer was told that he could no longer proceed as there was an uncleared minefield, and so he took his ship to Swinemunde to disembark refugees. Upon arrival, she was pressed into service once again by the army to bombard advancing Soviet troop columns. Over the coming days, the Admiral Scheer expended over 700 rounds of 28cm and 15cm shells, really pushing the life expectancy of those barrels. As there was no 15cm ammunition in Swinemunde, the cruiser finally sailed for Kiel, not before taking on more refugees and wounded, arriving on March 18th, where she went to the fitting out basin of the Deutsche Wecke near the cruisers Admiral Hipper and Emden. By this time, Allied bombers were operating virtually unopposed in the air and were mainly threatened by scattered concentrations of anti-aircraft guns, with the civilian populations of the cities having to hide in cellars, bunkers, or ruins, especially in the bombed-out city of Kiel. So, to help in the defenses, the anti-aircraft guns and ammunition aboard the Admiral Scheer were taken off to hopefully provide for defenses for the city and the surrounding area. Unfortunately for the Admiral Scheer, her heavy armament was unserviceable because of the proposed barrel changeovers. B turret completed the exchange on the 8th of April, and because of the constant threat of air attacks, a proposal to bring the ship out into Heikendorf Bay was put forward on the 10th to have a floating crane assist in the exchange of A turret's barrels. Some of the ship's company had been disembarked, including most of the cadets. So the following night, when bombers came overhead, a majority of the ship's company was off the ship. Gerhard Koop and Klaus-Peter Schmolke have this to say in their book, Pocket Battleships of the Deutschland Class, Warships of the Kriegsmarine. At 9:50 p.m. on the 9th of April, there was an air raid warning and most of the remaining crewmen went to bunkers ashore, leaving aboard 90 or so officers and men of the damage control parties. The first bombs began falling at 10:30, and the ship was first hit at 10:38 p.m. At 10:45, hits caused lighting and command relay systems to fail, and the cruiser assumed a list of 16 degrees to starboard. But power was restored long enough to get the ground vents open and make compensatory flooding to halt the list at 18 degrees. At just after 10:45, as a consequence of further hits and near misses, the list increased quickly to 28 degrees. At which point, the engineer officer of the watch gave the command to leave the electrical plant running and gave the command to abandon the ship. The order did not reach all of the centers because of the electrical failures, although individual posts were abandoned as soon as the gravity of the situation became apparent. The remaining crew climbed through burning and smoke-filled rooms to reach companionways and portholes. Some crewmen were killed or injured by falling machinery and components. Despite the asphyxiating condition and their exhaustion, groups dragged injured or unconscious shipmates to safety, those not being able to swim the few strokes to the quayside being picked up in the water by small craft. Salvage workers from Emden cut into the hull in several places, and rescue teams scoured the upturned hull for 72 hours in search of the survivors. Having discharged her ammunition and fuel, Admiral Scheer was high out of the water and ballasted with a small amount of seawater in the double bottom. She capsized over a period of about 12 to 17 minutes in 15 meters of water, the primary cause being the large gash on the starboard side caused by near misses. All 8 members of Damage Control Party 1 and 7 other crew members, including 3 engineer cadets, were left entombed in the mangled remains of the ship. The mangled remains of the Admiral Scheer and other German vessels were captured in the devastated city of Kiel by the advancing British forces in early May 1945. Kiel was largely destroyed in World War II, especially the dock area since this was a major port city for Germany and the Kriegsmarine. Where in this photo you can see the Mainlea Bluma, the former Norwegian Olav Tryggvason, and a Type 21 U-boat. There are a number of photos taken of the Admiral Scheer, mostly taken by British authorities, like this one where it reveals 2 things. One, a really good view of the capsized warship, with a prefabricated bow of a U-boat in the foreground, and the valuable metals that could be salvaged from the warship, as the armor plate and propellers contain metals that could be reused for other applications. So under the British authorities, work began breaking up the wreck in July 1945, where all valuable metals, gun houses, and turrets were removed before the bare torso of the ship was abandoned where she lay. Now, this is where things start to get difficult in the research, as there are not a lot of good sources out there for the scrapping of the ship, at least in English. So, as a disclaimer, I am not a historian, I don't have a degree, and I've never claimed to be one. I do my best to select sources, of which a majority of them are secondary sources, and therefore I use my best judgment to sift through the information they present. I will always try my best to give you all factual information, and specifically in this video, I will try to give you what little information there is to help show the full picture. With all of that being said, let's continue. It seems the ship was broken up in a number of ways, being cut up with welding torches and the possible use of explosives. As the scrapping process got underway, the ship was moved slightly to allow for scrappers to get to parts of the ship that were above the waterline, that were really now below the water. Much of the scrap metal went on to Britain to be processed, and by the following July, the scrapping had come to a completion because the cost of further efforts to scrap her were too expensive, as it would require the ship to be towed elsewhere to finish the job. So what was left of the Admiral Scheer, which were pieces of the hull, were left where they sat. By 1949, the reconstruction of Western Germany was beginning, and the principal Baltic naval base of the future and past German navies was no exception. So, when it came time to start building the new naval arsenal, the remains of the mangled hull were covered over with rubble to become the foundations of a new large parking lot, with the ship's remains most likely being in this area. I could not find a source that says they were removed from the ship, so if anybody has any information on that, I would be happy to highlight that in the comments. From the information I can gather, the Admiral Scheer is really buried in Kiel. Well, the remains of the Admiral Scheer, because what's left after the scrapping could hardly be considered a ship. I really tried my best to find information on the scrapping, but it was nearly impossible. Also, welcome back to Wednesday videos. They are going to be shorter than the Saturday videos, as you can tell. I know this one is a re-upload slash redo, and that's because of a couple reasons. One, not a whole lot of you watch the original video, and two, because I've kind of been busy with life as of late, so this is what we're going to have to work with for now. Let me know what you all think about the Penza ships. They are one of my favorite classes, as I think they are rather good looking ships. Anyway, please remember to like and subscribe, as it'll help the channel to grow. Until next time, my friends, have a great day.